Okay, Martins, you're muted.
Hey, sorry, I was so excited and I forgot to unmute my mic.
Yeah.
Welcome everyone. Hey Ruth, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine. Welcome everyone to another GitHub Africa Virtual Meetup. We are
Yeah,
glad to have you here again this
yeah,
July.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty excited to have you guys here today. We have a lot of goodies for all of our friends in Africa and around the world. And
Mm-hmm.
looking forward to an informative meetup today. Looking to meet all of you guys and just get connected. So we'll go through some agenda for us today.
Yeah, we have a lot
Um,
in
yeah,
today.
but first of all, I've been doing this for a couple of months now. I think not a couple of months, for almost a year now. So you must have met me before. But if you haven't, if this is your first time, I'm an account executive here at GitHub, and I'm also a small investor and a cryptocurrency enthusiast. Even though cryptocurrency has been a terrible investment
Yeah,
over the
I've not been hearing any gist about crypto lately.
everyone is pretty scared about cryptocurrency. Well, you can check me out on Twitter and LinkedIn if you want to get to know me more. Ruth, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, I will. So, if you have not seen me here before, I'm Ruth. I'm a technical content manager at Animals. I do basically technical writing, and I'm currently in Nigeria. And I'm also a GitHub Star. Yeah, I'm part of the stars here from Africa. And I recently started hosting the meetup. This is like the second time, and we have like a lot in store for it today. And also, Martin talked about the games. Yeah, so the last time we did like with the games were not really fun, but this time we have like some Kahoot games for everyone. So please do join the Zoom session.
Make sure you stay to the end to enjoy those games.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, you want to go through Ruth? You want to go through our agenda for today?
Yes, sure. So I'm pretty excited about this session. Initially, we were supposed to have Mike, but there was some um, challenge. So we have another speaker, an amazing speaker. So today, we're after the news, after the GitHub news, after I am Martins, like go through the GitHub news, would have Samson Goddy, talk to us. We'll have like an OSS Africa panel, and he's going to be speaking to us about open source community in Africa with all he has done. So I know I'm going to come up in his slides definitely because I really started open source from listening to Samson Goddy and every other thing I've done for in open source in the past 1 year. I've also witnessed the growth of open source here in Africa. So it's going to be a pretty amazing session, and I'm definitely looking forward to all Samson Goddy we share today. And so after that, we'll be having like a networking session, right? We're going to be talking about challenges and best practices with open source. It's something that people really like struggle to. Some persons, especially for beginners, struggle to come into open source. So we're going to be discussing those challenges, and we are also going to be having a special trivia session where there will be some GitHub swags. If you win, that's if you win. So we all look forward to that. So that's up on our agenda for this month and for today. So yeah, we head on to like GitHub news. So I'll hand over to Martin to pick on with that.
All right. Thank you, Ruth. Uh,
Mhm.
So there's been a lot going on recently here at GitHub. There's always a lot going on at GitHub.
Yeah,
I'm constantly being overwhelmed by all the
yeah.
things.
So many new features to share today.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to keep up sometimes. But there's been an upgrade to some of the functionality within GitHub Actions. Specifically, if you're a GitHub maintainer and you're working on open source, project, you now have additional control over how actions are approved for new contributors. So when you go into your, actions or your settings or your actions tab, you will see three different requirements for new contributors, whether it's to require approval for first time contributors who are new to GitHub, and then there's another one to require approval to run workflows, require approval for outside collaborators, to run workflows on their pull request. So there are different additional functionality for new maintenance on your project on the GitHub platform. So definitely go check out your open source repositories. You should already have this feature enabled for you. And additionally, another thing also to keep in mind with these new settings for maintenance is that when an outside contributor submits a pull request to a public repository, a maintainer with write access may need to approve any workflow that runs on that repository. So with this new functionality, maintainers now have additional control over when they must approve actions to run for new contributors, and also GitHub Actions will now require those maintainers that have write access to run those workflow for those first timers, so that you can have more granular control within your repositories and within your project. So definitely go check this out. And another thing we also made some improvements on is the Markdown editor. So specifically, you can now create a release to a package software along with release notes and links to binary files for other people to use. So and all of this is possible with the Markdown editor. The Markdown editor is used to create or edit a release in a GitHub repository, and it now has a test based. So you can also like manage releases using the GitHub CLI. I don't know if I think someone, maybe Erin or Adra, can place a link to the GitHub CLI in on YouTube so that you guys can check it out. But you cannot use the GitHub CLI to manage how Markdowns are edited within your repository. So I'll share more information here on this new Markdown editor for you guys to take a look at. Did you have anything to add here?
Not really. I'll take the next one.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay, so another one, yeah, with all the features GitHub has been pushing in. So GitHub discussions integrations are now available on GitHub Actions, where you can automate discussions, integrate it in GitHub Actions, and get that started with. So I'll hand over to you, Martin.
All right. And the I think out of all the updates, this one is the coolest one. Our CEO Nat Friedman announced this on GitHub, a blog, a couple of weeks ago. So basically, like when I was in boot camp, like me and some of my classmates will get on some software online to do pair programming.
Yeah.
And with the GitHub Copilot, now you now have an AI or a machine giving you suggestions
Exactly.
as you make code, as you write code. So GitHub Copilot is pretty cool. I'll send a link in on YouTube for you guys to take a look at it. So basically,
Mhm.
you have a new AI programmer that is paired with you as you write your code. So GitHub Copilot draws context from the code you're already working on. So it sorts of like get ideas of like what you're trying to write in your editor, and give you suggestions to like hey, maybe you want to try this function out, or you want to try this this function. So it gives you all of those suggestions, just like when you sometimes when you're writing a Gmail, you're writing an email on Gmail and you're typing something, Google automatically sends you like things of like what you're trying to write, and gives you like a code snippet for or a phrase for you to use to write your email. That is sort of like how Copilot works. So the AI that is powering Copilot, they will give you gives you basic suggestions or lines of code to like write entire functions that you're trying to work on, and it helps you to quickly discover alternate ways to solve problems. So one thing with software engineering is there are multiple ways, multiple solutions to a given problem. So with this AI, with this Copilot feature, you would get multiple suggestions to like solve a problem. I think this is pretty huge for developer productivity, speed of completing maybe functions you're trying to write for your code or your application. So more links will be added to YouTube for you guys to take a look at. And Open we had a collaboration at GitHub with Open AI to develop GitHub Copilot. And another thing is GitHub Copilot is powered by Open AI Codex. You can find Open AI on github.com. It's an open source, a pretty big open source project on github.com. So um, basically, OpenAI Codex has a broad knowledge of how people use code, and is significantly more capable than GPT 3 in code generation. These are all like pretty technical stuff. I would send links of all of this information for you guys to take a look at and read more on sorry the Copilot's pair programming functionality at GitHub. So I think this is the last. Yeah. So that was the last new feature that we released over the past couple of weeks. So definitely go check it out, guys. Um, so that is that for
Sweet.
that. Ruth, do you want to
Yeah.
introduce our speaker?
Definitely. Okay, so I think we are this time like for to talk about open source, and it's basically what Samson loves talking about. So you're going to be getting a lot of information. So let's have Samson Goddy. So Samson Goddy is a director of community at Sourcegraph, and is also the founder of open source community here in Africa. So yeah, over to you, Samson.
Hi, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think I should be, yeah, I think I should be able to make an introduction to the panel. So I think sometime in 2019, I had the opportunity to be at GitHub Universe to talk about open source in Africa. And one of the important things about that conversations was there was a lot of projects that I was involved with, including building a community called the Open Source Community Africa. Sorry, it's a bit confusing, but the actual organization that I co-founded is called the Open Source Community Africa. And the conversation that I was having at the university in 2019 was to discuss the state of open source. So I believe the panel video you'll be seeing after this section is basically to kind of give a context of what was discussed, It was a pretty interesting conversation because we talked about majority of things that was majority of things that's currently a challenge in Africa, and how open source has been able to connect the dots. Personally, for my career, Ruth mentioned earlier ago how open source helped her career. So you see that kind of a story coming up going forward. So I think I believe the panel video should be up. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
So my name is Samson Goddy, and we'll be talking about the state of open source in Africa. And here is Sonia, David, and also Lungert. So there's been some couple of interesting question and interest on what is the state of open source? How do we get more Africans to participate on open source projects, to be open source maintainer, or to look for ways to kind of localize content that will bring more interest from the continent? Yes, it's not a country, it's a continent with over 50 countries, and I don't speak African. Actually, I'm from a country that have over 500 languages. Yes, I speak English. So the aim of this conversation is to basically show the African commitment towards open source and to introduce the uniqueness of being an African in open source, and to also demonstrate the collaborative effort, given the recent report from GitHub showing how, Africa has been growing really big. So I'll ask you this question, Sonia. Do you want to tell us more about yourself and introduce yourself to them?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Sonia John. I'm a bot and protocol developer. I'm also the head of tech at Afrolink. It's a German-based company that is focused on impact building for startups. And I'm glad to be here today.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So David, you want to take over from here?
Yeah, hi, and welcome to the panel. My name is David Lamayan. I'm CTO at Code for Africa. We're the continent's largest civic tech organization. Essentially, we build technologies and help innovations across journalism, government, CSOs, and we try to do that across the continent. Thanks.
Look good?
Cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Lungam Tembo. I'm a software developer at an organization called OpenUp. So our goal at OpenUp is to, so essentially we are an open data organization that we try to help citizens understand data so that they can make decisions about their communities and even work with government as well.
Okay, so a little bit about me. My name is Samson Goddy. Oversight board for a project called Sugar Labs. If you're familiar with the One Laptop per Child, give one, get one for free project. And I'm also help building a community called Open Source Community Africa, which we're also trying to advocate more in the open source continent. So speaking about open source, Sonia, do you want to tell us how did you get into open source? Was it scary for you at first?
Well, I think for me, I got into open source by mistake. I mean, I just kind of bumped into it. Because actually it starts off with the story of how I became a programmer. I learned to code out of necessity, so to speak, because when hyperinflation hit my country, I'm from South Sudan, and when hyperinflation got into my country, I think our currency was devalued by, say, 1,000%. I no longer had a job. I had to find something to do. And out of necessity, I learned to code. I taught myself how to program. And I think one time I was using a tool to build an application that I was working on, and I noticed a bug. So I decided, hey, I can point this out, to the maintainers. Hey, I noticed this bug, can I fix it? And the feedback was not so good, but that was kind of my first interaction with it, and I realized all the things that I had to do around open source contributing, and that was pretty much my journey.
So what was it towards the code side, or like documentation, or like basically trying to build a community? What?
So it was more of a bug fix request because I noticed I could run the program on my side and it was not working because of something that needed to be fixed. And when I made that recommendation, I think I had not followed the right steps in open source contributing because it turns out, there was all this contributing to open source guidelines that I had never interacted with. And that was pretty much how I ended up learning about this whole industry.
So you got into open source by mistake.
Yeah. And it's been a fun ride since then. So I've been learning about all different kinds of policies, maintainer policies, and yeah.
So David, you run Code for Africa, and what kind of drive that idea? It's basically you have interest, or you're a programmer, right? Yeah. And you're building a community. So do you want to tell us more about Code for Africa? What is Code for Africa? For people, I'm just, for me here, tell it to as if I'm a 5-year-old,
You don't know. It's interesting. Do I run Code for Africa? No, definitely not. Okay. I think we're a lot of us. Okay. We currently have staff in 8 countries across the continent. We have organizations that are part of the network in 22 other countries. There are 54 countries on the continent. And we see ourselves as an ecosystem builder, almost like an impact accelerator, where we look to seed ideas into the continent using leapfrog technologies, essentially taking what's working in other countries and making it as a solution here. I mean, as Sonia said, it's sort of, you get into open source sometimes by mistake, and then sometimes you are looking to solve some solutions locally that have been solved by other people across the globe. So what we figured out is we, as Code for Africa, are able to use some of these technologies, developed and simple technologies that have been developed all over. Everything from air quality sensors, drones, and even small things like SMS solutions that we then also contribute to the open source community and try and replicate it across the continent.
That sounds really interesting. Yeah. It sounds like, do you even sleep?
I try to sleep a few hours, but I mean, when you're working with teams from Mexico and South America,
the time zone.
It's really good.
So, Lunga, do you want to share your experience? How did you get into open source? Or by mistake, or?
It was also kind of from a necessity. Is that okay? Let me say, Windows Vista made me work on Linux because I was having trouble with the operating system. So I said I need to find something else I can use. That's how I got into Linux. But when I got into it, I didn't really know anything about the Linux and open source community. And one of the first problems I had after installing was that I didn't have any wireless internet. So I had to dig around the documentation to find out how can I actually get my wireless driver to work. And that's how I met other developers saying, hey, try this program, it doesn't work for you, write this code, send it to us, and we'll see whether they can fix or not. And that was my real first introduction. So I was kind of forced to know what was going on so that I can actually get my Wi-Fi driver to work. So that was how I got started. Yeah.
So David, let's come back to, or let's go back to Africa, right? When it comes to open source, the word open source, there's this, focused on developers, and in Africa there's a lot of interest, especially towards the social good side. So how do you think that open source can kind of enhance opportunities for journalists, people that kind of not really into the whole technical side?
Yeah.
Do you think there's an opportunity on that side, towards the open source movement?
I think the way you said it is sort of like the non-technical teams, outside of the developer space, yeah. So even outside the normal social for good change space. Yeah. My mother last week was like, David, what are you, or Lamayan, that's what she calls me. Lamayan, what is this open source thing, right? What does open source mean? And she was telling me, enjoy yourself at the GitHub, so that's how she puts it. But the idea of expanding, sort of the opportunity and the access to open source, we have found is important to the ecosystem. We're working with much smaller budgets than most other continents. If you think about America, the GDP, all of this. Access, so open source sort of reduces that barrier for access to technology, access to solutions, right? If you can't pay a massive licensing fee, you essentially can be able to spend that money in paying other developers, being able to pay for journalism, being able to pay for the kind of activists or the kind of government officials that you need on the ground to do the job. So for us, we see as open source reducing that barrier, but also reducing that cost for people to be able to get access to this technology to do the work, to engage with citizens.
Now, you did mention something about cost, which I want to, I know you're big into money. So, we're in San Francisco, right? And the technical jobs here, based on the cost of living of this, the city, tends to go really, really high, right? Now, back in Africa, how do you think, so I come from a country where about 60 to 70% of the population are under the age of 30, right? And within that number, most of the engineers, software engineers are currently in university or doing something that is not work related, like, working in the industry. And coming from a country that 70% of the GDP focused on crude, petroleum, not like technology. How do you get to compensate, or try to sell open source to somebody that is struggling in university, trying to pay all the bills, How do you think companies or organizations should look for ways to compensate these engineers to build software, just as David mentioned, towards building things for social good?
No, I think that's a great question. And the way I can summarize it is we're trying to find ways to motivate implementers of free software development on the continent to actually increase free software development and adoption. And before we can even discuss how to restructure the motivation itself, we need to find out what actually drives developers to open source. What makes someone decide, hey, look, I want to contribute to building this free software? It's very different in the case of proprietary software development because you have almost an instant gratification for the work that you do. So a company hires you, they tell you, hey, can you build this software for us, and this is how much we're going to pay you. So it's almost instant gratification. While in the case of free software development, we have to deal with a lot of deferred rewards for the work that you do. So maybe you fix a bug, you build a feature, you build the entire infrastructure, and you can only get rewards for what you do much later. I think one of the ways that we can flip that motivation and reward system for Africa is maybe say, look, let's focus on some of the key players or stakeholders, some of what I focus on is working with proprietary software builders. This is companies that hire developers. And what we try to do is we try to get them to build software that is mixed. So it's half of it can be open source and another half of it can be closed. I can give you a brief example of something that we did earlier this year with a popular insurance company. Is we got them to build a model for simple insurance-based payments on mobile. And what we did is we got them to make the entire infrastructure open source and only get them to pay contributors for customizing the solution when they want to sell it. That way, you can attract more contributors to work on the closed source part of it, but they can also contribute on the open source part of it.
I think that's a very brilliant idea. And now, speaking about money and sustainability in Africa, so I part of stuff I do when I'm not coding, I do some work for the community. There's this thing called the African Girls Can Code towards the nonprofit side. I serve as a contractor for the United Nations, building a culture where we train African girls on technology, which obviously do a lot of things around nonprofit. So just 6 months ago, I was in Addis Ababa, and we obviously they wanted us to teach the girls on coding, but then was looking for a way not to spend a lot of money on software. And well, the funny thing is, I can easily just tell them, oh, I can teach them basic Git and GitHub, right? How to do version control, how to go to W3 school, reference HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, towards the nonprofit side and towards the NGO side, how do you think leveraging open source as a main tool can help save a lot of money, like in terms of like cost? Because like she mentioned, our government tend to spend a lot of money on licensing, and as an NGO, right, not everybody have that huge reserve of money as the government. So what's your thought around that?
So I think in general what happens is that most NGOs, they don't really know about open source software. They know about the commercial space because it's the safe choice. So when we approach NGOs, we try and just tell them about, hey, there is an alternative solution to this commercial product. And at the same time as well, you also be saving a lot of money, and you will get maintainers. So one of the biggest fears is that, this is an open source product. It's not, no one is responsible for it. But then once we actually go through the process as to what open source is, how it works, what the maintainers are, then they actually start seeing that, actually this is a valuable thing, and that this is something that can last us for a couple of years. And then we don't really have to depend on anybody. We don't have to depend on a particular company. We can depend on other developers who are interested in what we are doing as well. So the NGOs are more receptive to that, but the government is still a bit finicky, that they still want commercial products with a vendor. So we're trying to get into the space where we're trying to tell government that open source is not a scary beast. It's something that is maintainable and sustainable as well.
Now, let's talk. We've talked about money. We've talked about community and ecosystem. We've talked about saving money as an NGO. But now let's come back to the actual contribution. I know in the South there's a lot of open source maintainer waiting to hear how to build the next billion creators. Now, speaking about advocacy, right? There's been the recent report from the Octoverse, stating how, countries, like Nigeria, Kenya, and Morocco, I think some couple of countries on the northern side of Africa, has been growing really, really well. What do you think is driving this force? I know you're from South Africa, South Sudan, and also in Kenya. Kenya is also very big in terms of like development space. So what do you think is driving this force? Because if you're looking, compared to other continents like North America or in Europe or Asia, just like what I mentioned, right? Most of these engineers are students. They don't work for Google or Facebook or GitHub or Microsoft, and not everybody get that opportunity to get paid to work for open source. So what do you think is driving that force of actual contributions? Do you think there's an advocacy vibe going on in Africa?
Contributors. I like what you said, alternative to proprietary software.
Yeah.
One of the things that we are finding as well, and how Lunga said it, is that a lot of governments, a lot of commercial entities, and even bigger organizations that are more established are most worried about maintainability. And I think that's one of the things that we're finding is that cost of maintainability or maintenance being reduced by taking up open source software. And we feel that therefore, and this is why we feel that we need to build an ecosystem, because we need to close those skills gaps, right? And by closing those skills gaps is by being able to give people access to code, access to software, and building that ecosystem such that more people are able to maintain this code, more people are able to contribute and be able to even be hired within the government institutions, within the NGOs, within even the corporates to be able to make this code available. And so for us, I think what's driving that change, what's driving that uptake is that people are being able to see that with this gap, when you close this skill gap, you're able to actually reduce your cost of maintenance and your cost of development and even adoption of some of the latest technologies.
Sonia, since you were more focused around money, do you have any comments yet?
No, I mean, I'm glad that he mentioned closing the skills gap because, like I mentioned, some of the work that we do at AfroLink, working with startups, is building the tech developer pipeline as well. And the way that we do that is by working with developers at every level where they come, beginners, intermediate, or even experts. And the startups or the companies that we choose to work with in our impact acceleration programs, what we tend to do is we try to make sure that at least 50% of the startups that we work with are building free software or open source software, so that developers who then get placed into these companies or startups, as interns or placed there for mentorship or placed there even for jobs, get the opportunity to work or contribute to open source. And I think if we get more organizations doing something like this, then we can see the increase in open source contribution to not just maybe increasing by 40%, maybe even 50 or 60% in the next few years.
Okay. Lunged, how is the open source community, particularly in South Africa?
I think the community is not as big as Nigeria and Kenya, but I think we're starting to see open source starting to take hold in South Africa, because we've created a community branch, a community version of our organization, and what we found is that people are actually starting to come to these meetups, and they actually want to start working on projects, because one of our goals is to we've got three ways to use an organization. We've got inform, empower, and activate. So inform people that something like this exists. Empower means that they can actually do something about it, and to activate means that they can start engaging with government. So once we go through all those steps with them, they can see that, oh, this is a useful thing, and we've got the tools to actually start working with government. Let's start working on projects. Mm-hmm. So that's how and what we've seen, especially this year, is that our community has grown more and more and more, because we're starting to say that, hey guys, we've got these cool projects that people are starting to work on. Do you want to come and contribute? It's open source. You don't have to be a developer, because I think sometimes we focus too much on the tech, but in some cases, even a designer can come and actually make a good contribution to a project. Yeah. So we try not to exclude. So we try not to only talk to developers. We try to talk to people from different industries as well. Because we're starting to get lawyers coming to our meetups as well. They want to see whether other tools that they use to improve their law process. So having that thing that, hey, there's an open source product that you can use, or an open source meetup, you can actually start seeing what's going on.
Interesting, because you mentioned about, like I said, one of the challenges of defining open source to a newbie or a newcomer is this stand of, you need to be a software engineer, you need to write code in order to contribute to open source, which what we do at the Open Source Community Africa, which I co-founded last year actually, is to actually drive this huge ecosystem of having designers, content creators, people that can actually see how they could build some business model out of some open source project. And I think it's kind of like based on how personally I got into open source. I got access to the One Laptop Per Child project a couple of years back. I started using the tool, the computer, and I got interested in how things work, because I like breaking things. And so I think I kind of like got my way around the OS, learned Python, created a game, blah, 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 and now became a maintainer for that organization. And as a maintainer for a project that is focused on education, and then in terms of like age range between 8 to 16, it's kind of like, difficult, right, to explain how just to put it into context, we every year through projects like the Google Summer of Code and Google Coding, we receive lots of young people in the community. My job is to help mentor, to make sure they actually follow code of conduct and not fight around. The thing is, even back in Africa, right? If you want to host or if you're doing an open source focused event, you always get engineers or people writing code, and then when you ask the designers, hey, why are you guys not there? It's like, is it free or is it not free? How much are you paying me? That's kind of vibe, right? And it's almost difficult to explain to a designer that pays from the computer to the tool to licensing, compared to the actual engineering where literally you can just go copy and paste some code to spend your time on Stack Overflow. So, this has been the challenges of, trying to build it. Well, it's not actually like, building diversity into open source, welcoming, I don't want to use the word non-technical, but bringing designers and, content creators, and, because anybody can write code. Let's just be real, right? So how do you think should be the interest? Because mind you, there's a lot of open source maintainers here that might particularly focus on this topic. How do you get to welcome people that don't write code as a day job or a day as designers? So what is like the selling point? What do you think we should focus on?
I think one of the first things that you should focus on is interest. Like, do they have interest in a particular field or industry that they're looking for? So,
it's a tough one, right?
Yeah. So usually what we starting to see is that we'll get say a journalist who will come to us and ask us, hey, I'm interested in finding out whether what's going on with evictions in my town, but I don't know where to start I don't know where to start in the process. So immediately we know that we can see that, okay, this is not a technical person, but let's tell them what is available. Let's help them go through the process, and then from there they can start seeing that, oh, actually I can build a product without necessarily knowing how to code. So we're also starting to remove the word technical or code or hackathon, because that immediately excludes different people. So for hackathons especially, we always combine technical people with non-technical people, so that we as developers can gain a different perspective as to how to think about a problem, and then once people can see that I can make a difference, even though I can make a difference to a project, even though I'm not technical, that'll give them motivation to actually come back and continue working on more projects.
Yeah, okay, I think that's a very good question. Now back to advocacy. Some weeks back, I was at the Open Source Summit, and somebody asked me one interesting question. Like, hey, Samson, I noticed I have in my community I have a lot of Africans contribute to open source, but for some reason they don't apply to speak at global conferences. And I was like, should I tell him? Like, in my mind I was like, should I really go into, like, should I actually explain the problem, or should I just kind of shy away from it? Because obviously we should be 5 here, right? And somebody got some visa issue, and so what do you think? Well, I'm going to come back to what I'll just leave the open source festival at the end of the talk. But what do you think for global conferences, like for example GitHub Universe, yes, contributing to open source is one, setting meetups is two, but then meeting people, getting to talk to people is really awesome. Networking is great, but the real problem here is issues of visas. How do you think we can tackle that problem? Is it by bringing conferences down to Africa, or what do you think is the problem in order to solve that? Because, of course, advocacy is a thing. You need to go there, talk about what you do in Africa, but then there's that big brother, which is visa. You always, like the first time I got my US visa in 2017, I spent roughly 15 minutes explaining to the officer why I need a visa, which is crazy. So, so what's your thought around that? I don't know, Sonia, do you have comment on that?
Well, not on the visa issue, but no, I like the point that you brought up about maybe bringing conferences or people who are interested in open source to developers or people interested in the free software industry to the continent. And I think there's a lot of ways that people can do that. Personally, I'm excited about the announcements that GitHub made yesterday at the keynote about GitHub for mobile and GitHub sponsorship. I think those two things combined with maybe voice to text is going to change how developers interact, with open source, because I don't know about the statistics about internet connectivity just yet, but I know that almost every African has a mobile device, and if they can now use GitHub on their mobile device, I think it can improve the way that they contribute or even create repositories, etc. And maybe the sponsorship program will encourage more people, to contribute, because then they can see, okay, maybe there is a reward for the work that I do. And for independent developers or maintainers who are interested in working with developers, maybe as mentorship, there's lots of organizations on the continent, even in Europe, in Africa, that are creating peer-to-peer mentorship opportunities, right? So if you can find some of these organizations and maybe try to sign up or even offer yourself to be a mentor to some of these people, it will maybe go a long way to improving the way open source is run, the free software industry is run, and maybe increase the number of developers that we have in the end.
Awesome.
All right. Hey,
Nice, Samson.
that was pretty cool. I didn't know you were universe in 2019.
It was interesting because I was supposed to be there with Ada Oyo, but then because it's very interesting because we were talking about visa, so she had a visa problem, so that's why I was. Yeah.
It's notoriously hard to get US visas from Nigeria.
Sure.
Yeah, cool. We just have a few questions for you before we end the meetup and go to Zoom. I think the first one that event was in 2019. So, like, what changes have you seen in the open source space from 2019 to 2021 through the pandemic? What have you seen on the community?
So I would say two things, right? So the immediate change. So between the time for the festival, for the panel section at the Universe, I was planning with my team the open source festival. So I think that was basically the highlight of what we were trying to communicate to give the Western world a kind of an idea of like what open source is or how people perceive it in Africa. Mm-hmm. So I think that event was in November 2019, I believe, and then in February 2020 we did the open source festival. And then the interesting thing about that festival was the fact that we positioned the messaging, the branding, including the type of speakers, to kind of give the outside people the understanding of, hey, some of the project that you rely on as a company or as an individual is either created by an African or being maintained by some Africans, right? Mm-hmm. So we created that image to kind of give, folks from the US, folks from Europe, folks from Asia, to say, okay, like this is the faces behind those crazy usernames on GitHub or those crazy nicknames from IRC or something, right? And it worked because between the panel section and the festival, like first a lot of companies sponsored the event, so that shows that a lot of companies were excited, right? Mm-hmm. But then on the individual side, people came like. For the first time, for the first event that I wasn't even sure that it's going to be that massive, we got over 800 people and a lot of sponsors, and the speakers were just amazing. We were trying to rent a particular space for the event, but we ended up renting the whole entire building, like including other smaller places, right? It was that massive because people saw the panel section, people saw the conversations driving to the festival, and then sadly, the reason I'm saying sadly is because like the festival happened the 22nd, and I think on the 27th of February, then there was the first case of COVID in Lagos, and then everywhere was on lockdown. So that was the last event, the last biggest event in Africa, and like the most popular event in Nigeria at that time. And everybody went back, and then that was quite interesting because at that time, when people were talking about open source, the open source festival, they wanted to have in-person mentorship, or they want to work for this company in person. Like the actualness of like, okay, I want to do this physically, having a mentor physically was a demand. But then, interestingly, COVID taught us that, hey, everything can go virtual. And then that gave people the opportunity to go back into the drawing board and rethink ways that they can contribute to open source project, receive mentorship, and even, drive their career, going forward. So I think that was a lot of factors. And of course, more projects came from the continent. People got really excited. People got more jobs. That's just one big amazing time.
That's beautiful. Just one more question before Ruth gets to our question. Is there a festival coming up in the future? I know COVID is still like in the background. Are you thinking of something in the future this year?
Sure. This year I met it actually. We just had a conversation, including Ruth. I was in Lagos a couple weeks ago. I think about 2 weeks ago. I think. So we're thinking about having a festival virtually. In Lagos. When I mean in Lagos, there's a part of the festival that would be in person called the Sustain. That's going to be more of a smaller group, but the actual event itself is going to be on the cloud. So I think it's going to be sometime in November-ish. So I would say people should watch out for the dates within the end of this month. We should be officially be mentioning something going forward.
Yeah, I might be in Nigeria in November, so I'll be
great. Great. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So before I go on to my questions, I want to talk about the Open Source Festival 2019 or early 2020, right? It was early 2020. Okay.
Yeah, early 20. Q1 of 2020. Yeah.
I wasn't there, but I watched some clips, some YouTube videos just to touch. You can check out Oscar's YouTube channel, and then you can also watch those YouTube videos that where they were recorded, right? They were all recorded. So so the question we have for you next is, are there any projects you are excited about at the moment? Any open source projects? Give us a sneak peek. The ones you're excited about at the moment.
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of edutech or edtech, or depending on how you pronounce it, because that's how I got into programming in the first place. My background came from creating solutions for school, kindergarten learning and all that. So I'm still a huge fanboy of Sugar Labs. That's why I still contribute to the Sugar Labs project. If you're heavily on the code side, if you're heavily on the Python side, so you see a lot of issues. You should check it out, github.com/sugarlabs. It's a really, really interesting welcoming community. But I say back in Africa, there's been a lot of open source projects that I've seen lately, but the highlight one, the one I've seen hugely, I think the one that is a bit popular, really, really popular, is Chakra UI from Shengu. Shengu has been doing amazing work. I think I've had the opportunity to connect with him. Hopefully we get him as a speaker for the Open Source 2022. Again, there's a lot of projects that I'm really, really proud of, even the ones coming from Oscar, coming forward, which I will be announcing very soon. But Sugar Labs is something I'm really, really proud of. I'm still a huge fan of Linux desktop projects. So if you're into Linux graphical user interface, the GNOME project, Fedora, Ubuntu, KDE, all those kind of things are things that I'm really, really I'm excited about when it comes to project. Of course, there's a lot more project, because I always contribute to projects that I care about in terms of topics. So education, desktop, and community-based stuff are something that I'm really excited about.
That's pretty cool. Education software is something that I've been thinking about. I have some friends in Canada that are thinking of opening a school in Nigeria. So definitely be taking a deeper look at Sugar Labs to see how that can be leveraged in a secondary school situation in Nigeria and all of that. So thank you for that. Another question that I was thinking about is, do you think the future of innovation in Africa is correlated to open source contribution and participation? I think so, but what do you think?
So I think it's more of the future is open, which is probably the team for the 2022 festival. I think the future is open because, like, if anything that the last 1 year has taught us as an individual Africans is the fact that the breakthrough that people have made, from the entertainment industry to the technical industry to every aspect of career has come from that openness. People have been able to leverage platforms to break barriers, to change that traditional media. Like, personally, I have not, to be completely honest with you, like, I've never had the opportunity to work in an office in tech before, ever, right? Since when I started coding till today, all virtual, right? Open source open source gave me that opportunity to keep, like, I've been doing remote for about 10 years. So it's just shows like how, first I thought it was crazy. I thought, like, a lot more companies are going to force people to come, work in person. But then eventually, with more companies, adopting open source models and bringing open source projects, even GitHub is remote, right? So, like, it just shows the opportunity that, hey, the things that we know growing up as a child in Africa, the concept, the understanding, just shows that when you have that open collaboration, having that mentality and to collaborate with people from, like, Rwanda, Tanzania, Kenya, Ghana, that just gives room for a lot more growth. And that's why I believe that the future is open, or the future around open source is just great, because when you have when you have a system that is open and is transparent, that gives room for more creativity and more thought and better help in terms of diversity. Because if you're talking about diversity, somebody asked me, how do you quantify diversity or true diversity in Africa? I was like, hey, it's not about color, because majority of the time, yes, they are white Africans, right? But then the majority of the people here are all blacks. So there's the language barrier, there's the cultural background, there's the gender side of it. There's just a lot of things that we classify when it comes to diversity. So having that openness of, like, having that one standard just gives room to more collaboration. So yeah.
Thank you, Samson.
Thank you, Samson. So the one big question, once we to wrap up, these questions we've asked is, how can one start contributing? Because then, so many persons here have listened to, your talk, the panel session, and you have touched upon some things on open source. So the big question is, how can one start contributing to open source?
I would say there are numerous ways we can do it. The normal way I always say is, like, if you're confused, you don't really know what to do, you can go to github.com/explore or /topics. I think GitHub has a really interesting way to, like, have groups of projects based on interest, based on language, based on population in terms of, like, numbers of stars and all. There are numerous of metrics that GitHub draws when it comes to, like, referencing project, right? But then there's the other one of when it comes to interest. So, like I said, the way I got into open source was because I was part of an initiative that was between my secondary school and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. So that got me interested in education, and that what brought me into Sugar Lab. So my open source project started as an interest. So I would say open source is so big, especially in 2021, to the fact that you can basically you can see any subject around open source. Like, about a year ago, I think people, the code that powered the space program recently was basically Python. So there's a lot of things that you can do with open source, right? From media to entertainment to technical to just a bunch of stuff. So I would say, you most likely go with things that that you're more interested in, or you just go through GitHub and try to there are a bunch of numerous stuff. I think there's, like, first contribution. I can't remember the full URL.
First contribution. It has so there's the one on GitHub, and then there's first timers only. That's like a site, with a whole lot of resources on contributing to open source. So
I think the best doc and guide I always like sharing is the open source guide. I think it's powered by GitHub also. It gives you an opportunity to how to start a project, how to contribute, how to join a community, what to know about licensing, which is one big thing in open source also. So that is a really great resources.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Samson. It was really nice having you as a speaker today. The discussion was great. Really excited to have you again. I'm looking forward to that conference that you're cooking behind the scenes. So really excited. So the last. So thank you so much, everyone. I think this is like the last piece of our meetup today.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be a speaker for this meetup, we have it every month. I think in the
Yeah.
middle of every month or towards the end of every month. We have another one in
Every
August.
Thursday.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So about 5 more meetups for this year before we call it a wrap. So if you have ideas, if you want to be a speaker, please go to the link on your screen and send us a message, and we would take a look at your proposal. And
Mm-hmm.
and also we'll be having a small networking a session with
Just after
Samson.
this.
Yeah, after now. So please join us over on Zoom. I think we'll be logging on Zoom right now because it's like in 1 minute. So
Yeah.
click on this link. It's also on YouTube, and we'll see you in Zoom. Also, there's a Kahoot game for you
Yeah,
guys.
there's the trivia game.
So make sure you are there. Any last words from you, Ruth?
Okay, so open source is something I really love talking about, right? It's basically, what brought me up to speed with technically, doing a whole lot of speaking events and all that, networking. So I would encourage you to, check out contributing to open source if you've not started, and also, get others to contribute, because that's like basically how we when once you start doing it, you bring others into it, right?
Mhm.
So I would encourage you to, get others to start contributing. If you have been contributing and you've not, you should also start contributing. So thank you everyone for, listening to this meetup for July. And like Martin said, if you want to be a speaker, we encourage you to like submit a topic. Even though you do not know how to craft that, just reach out to us and we'll definitely help you get started on with that. So I think now we can go over to Zoom and, get networking.
All right. See you guys.
Bye.
See you in Zoom. Bye.
Bye everyone.